Drop a if you believe the ancients had knowledge modern science is only now rediscovering. See, ancient Africa, energy, sound, and the soul, peace, light, and power, family. Welcome to tonight's live, the hidden science of ancient Africa, energy, sound, and the soul. I'm your host, The Hidden Voice, and tonight, we're not just talking history. We're talking memory. We're diving into the frequencies that shaped civilization long before the modern world even had a word for science. Before we start, I want everyone in the chat to drop where you're watching from. Let's see how far this energy travels tonight. Drop your flag, your city, your roots. Beautiful. I see family from Nigeria, Atlanta, Kenya, the Caribbean, Europe, and USA, global vibrations. Now, if you're new here, welcome. Go ahead and click the link in my bio, hit subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on that notification bell, so you don't miss any of our deep dives like this one. Tonight's live is one I've been wanting to do for months, because once you understand how the ancients saw energy, sound, and the soul, you'll realize they weren't primitive. They were engineers of spirit, scientists of frequency, architects of vibration, the first language, sound. Let's begin at the beginning, before writing, before stone, before metal. In African cosmology, creation begins not with light, but with sound. In Kemet, the Egyptians called it Hu, the creative word that brought life into form. The Dogon people of Mali called it Nomo, the sacred vibration that shaped the universe. Among the Yoruba, the power of the spoken word is Ace, the force that makes things happen once spoken. Every drumbeat, every chant, every prayer was more than ritual. It was technology. Because to the ancients, sound wasn't just something you heard. It was something that moved reality. Think about it. In the beginning was the Word. The same truth appears in every ancient tradition. Our ancestors didn't separate sound from spirit or art from science. They harmonized them. There's an old Egyptian teaching that the gods didn't speak, they intoned. Each tone carried geometry, color, and emotion. So when priests entered the temple and chanted the name of Ra or Ptah, they weren't just praying, they were activating fields of energy. That's the level of understanding we're dealing with. Imagine if modern physics and music therapy had a child, and that child was 10,000 years old. Type "vibration is life" in the chat if that resonates with you. Because from this moment on, I want you to think of sound not as entertainment, but as creation. Energy before electricity. Now, let's move to the question of energy. How did our ancestors understand it? In Kemet, it was Ka, the vital essence that animated every being. Among the Yoruba, it was Ace. In Congo cosmology, Ngolo. These weren't just poetic ideas. They were scientific frameworks for understanding how life itself flowed. Today we call it bioelectricity, prana, chi. But the African mind had already mapped this field long before. The pyramids of Giza weren't just tombs, they were energy harmonizers. The obelisks, conductors. The gold and quartz, natural amplifiers. Some theorists, like Christopher Dunn, even suggest the Great Pyramid functioned as a type of resonant power plant, using sound waves and water pressure to generate electromagnetic energy. Whether you agree or not, the fact remains. These structures were engineered with mathematical and acoustic precision that still confuses modern architects. And remember, even if we take the symbolic route, it still reveals an advanced understanding of how vibration and energy work together. Drop a if you believe the ancients had knowledge modern science is only now rediscovering. See, the ancients understood that energy wasn't separate from spirit. You didn't need a generator, you were the generator. The human body is the first temple, a living pyramid, tuned by rhythm, fueled by breath, aligned by thought. Architecture that sang. Now let's talk architecture, because the temples of Africa were not silent, they sang. Let's start in Ethiopia. Lalibela. Carved entirely from living rock, these churches aren't built, they're revealed. The acoustics are so perfect that when monks chant, the entire stone vibrates as if alive. In Egypt, the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid resonates at exactly 402 Hz, the same vibration used in healing music today. Coincidence or consciousness? Even in Great Zimbabwe, the stone walls are curved to reflect sound waves during ritual. The architecture wasn't just functional, it was vibrational. Imagine standing in those temples centuries ago, hearing the chants rise, drums echo through quartz-lined chambers, the air trembling with life. That's not superstition, that's acoustic science. It makes you wonder, were temples really places of worship? Or were they tuning devices for the soul? The power of the word. If sound is creation, then speech is divine engineering. The ancients guarded the power of the word. In Egypt, the act of speaking a god's name was seen as summoning their essence. In Yoruba tradition, the oriki, those sacred praise names, carry power to awaken the spirit within. Among griots, the spoken word wasn't just storytelling, it was activation. When a griot sang your lineage, he wasn't just reciting your past, he was reaffirming your spiritual frequency. This is why names mattered so much. To name was to define was to shape reality. What's a name or word that gives you strength? Type it in the chat. Tonight, we're remembering that every syllable has a vibration. That's why our ancestors spoke carefully. Because words didn't just describe reality, they programmed it. Healing with frequency. Let's go deeper. Healing through sound. Today, scientists talk about sound therapy, cymatics, resonant healing. But centuries ago, African healers were already using drums, flutes, and hums to realign the body's energy fields. In Mali, healers used rhythmic drumming to restore balance between body and spirit. In Congo traditions, vibration was used to chase out dis-ease, because illness was seen as disharmony of frequency. Now think about how even in churches today, or mosques or traditional temples, we use sound to elevate spirit. Chanting, singing, drumming, it's the same technology, just wrapped in new forms. When you sing in community, your heartbeats literally synchronize. Science proves it, that's unity, not just symbolic, but biological. The ancients didn't separate healing from worship, or worship from science. It was one system, one science of spirit. Maybe that's the real lost knowledge, not a machine, but a method of living in vibration with everything around you. The return of the frequency. Family, as we close tonight, here's the message. The ancients left us blueprints, in stone, in sound, in story, and we are the generation remembering them. We're living in an age where we can merge science and spirituality again, not to go backward, but to remember forward. Energy sound. The soul. These were never separate sciences. They were one. So the next time you drum, chant, or even speak your truth, remember you're continuing an ancient tradition. You're tuning reality with your vibration. That's why we say, speak life, think light, and move in rhythm with the universe. The frequency of the gods, how sound spoke to spirit. Now, family, let's go even deeper. What if sound wasn't just energy, but a language between worlds? Across Africa, there's an ancient belief that sound bridges the visible and invisible realms. The Yoruba say, Asenik Bogbo Oro. Every word carries force. The Dogon say Namo created form through vibration. Even in the Congo, sound is seen as the heartbeat of spirit. When you drum, the ancestors dance. So when our ancestors built temples with perfect acoustic design, they weren't trying to impress the ear. They were calling the unseen. Imagine this. A priest stands inside a granite chamber. He chants a name, not in speech, but tone. The walls hum. The air trembles. The body tingles. That's not religion. That's resonant invocation. This is what modern scientists now call acoustic levitation. We've seen experiments where sound waves move objects, small stones, even drops of water, through vibration alone. So when you hear legends of priests who could lift stones with sound, maybe it wasn't myth. Maybe it was mastery. The ancients were never afraid to merge physics and spirit, because to them, it was the same language. That's why the drum, the chant, the rattle, and the bell were not just tools, they were keys. Keys that unlock dimensions. Type in the chat, What's one sound that makes your spirit shift instantly? A drum beat? A hum? A word? Whatever it is, that's your ancestral frequency reminding you that sound is sacred. The hidden power lines of Africa, ley lines and sacred geometry. Let's talk geography, or rather, geoenergy. Because what if the placement of Africa's temples wasn't random? What if they were built along lines of natural energy, the Earth's veins? Modern researchers call them ley lines. Ancient Africans called them the paths of the spirits. If you trace the coordinates of Great Zimbabwe, the pyramids of Giza, the temples of Axum, and the shrines of Ife, you'll find astonishing alignments. Many sit along magnetic fields, rivers, or intersections of telluric current, natural electrical energy flowing through the Earth. Our ancestors felt this energy. They didn't need satellite maps. They had intuition and ceremony. That's why temples were always built where the Earth itself was alive. In Kemet, the Nile wasn't just a river. It was the cosmic artery, mirroring the Milky Way. The pyramids were placed like stars in Orion's belt, energy above mirrored by energy below. So maybe, just maybe, the ancients were mapping not just geography, but frequency. If you've ever walked into a sacred site and felt your skin tingle or your chest vibrate, you felt it. That's Earth energy, that's resonance. Type, "I've felt it" in the chat if you know what I mean. The forgotten women of energy, priestesses and sound healers, 10 minutes. Now we can't talk about sacred science without honoring the feminine energy that preserved it. In almost every African civilization, women were the keepers of the sound, the midwives of vibration. In Kemet, there were the chantresses of Hathor, women trained in resonance and healing frequencies. In Yoruba land, Iyanifa priestesses used sound and rhythm to open portals during divination. Among the Akan, women sang Nwankoro, songs so harmonically precise they were believed to heal grief and call ancestral spirits. When colonialism and dogmatic religion arrived, this feminine knowledge was labeled superstition, but it was science in harmony form. These priestesses understood what modern medicine is now rediscovering. Sound reorganizes matter. Emotion holds frequency, and vibration heals the nervous system. Every hum, every lullaby, every ritual song, it wasn't just music, it was medicine. If you've ever been healed by a song, even without understanding the lyrics, type "yes" in the chat. That's the ancient medicine still alive in your bloodline. The lost math of harmony, ratios, rhythms, and reality. Let's get mathematical for a moment. Because the ancients didn't just hear sound, they measured it. In Egypt, they used harmonic ratios, 2-3, 3-4, 4-5, the same ones found in modern music and geometry. The Dogon mapped the orbit of Sirius B with ratios identical to musical scales. And African drumming? It's pure mathematics, complex polyrhythms that mirror cosmic cycles. In other words, every beat was an equation, every chant a formula. Every temple, a musical instrument built in stone. Pythagoras, Plato, and other Greek philosophers later studied in Egypt. They didn't invent these ideas, they inherited them. So when we talk about the roots of science, of philosophy, of art, we're really talking about the same ancient African principle. As above, so below. As within, so without. Type "math is music" in the chat if that just blew your mind. DNA and memory, the science of ancestral resonance. Now let's bring it to the personal level. You. Because this isn't just ancient history, it's living memory. Studies in epigenetic frequencies in your DNA, frequencies your ancestors used intentionally. You are the tuning fork of your bloodline. That's why when you hear a drum beat, your heart doesn't ask permission to respond. It remembers. African spirituality wasn't about worshiping idols, and it was about harmonizing energy, becoming one with the rhythm of the cosmos. So family, you're not just studying your ancestors, you're reawakening them. The future of ancient science. What comes next? As we enter this new age, the era of AI, frequencies, and quantum technology, it's time to remember something. The ancients already walked this path. They understood sacred geometry. They built with vibration. They healed with sound and light. They read the stars like data. And now modern science is catching up, discovering that everything is vibration, that consciousness interacts with matter, that frequency can heal. So imagine what happens when we bring ancient wisdom and modern science together again. When the descendants of the builders, healers, and star watchers remember who they are. That's the purpose of lives like this. Not to just look back, but to remember forward. When the earth spoke, the African science of stones. Let's go into something most people overlook: the living stones of Africa. In Mali, Zimbabwe, and Kemet, stones weren't just materials, they were record keepers. Granite, quartz, and basalt were chosen because they resonate, they hold and transmit vibration. The great Zimbabwe walls were built without mortar, yet they've stood for centuries. Why? Because the builders understood stone harmonics. Each piece was placed like a note in a frequency code. Even in Egypt, the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid is made from granite filled with quartz, a natural amplifier of energy. So when the priests lay in those chambers and chanted, the walls themselves sang back. Our ancestors didn't need wires or screens. They built temples that remembered sound. Drop a high in the chat if you believe the earth itself holds memory. The blacksmiths of spirit, the alchemists of metal. Now let's talk about one of the most sacred professions in all of Africa, the blacksmith. In Yoruba, they were children of Ogun. In Congo, they were mediators between life and death. They didn't just shape metal, they transformed spirit. Iron wasn't only for tools or weapons. It symbolized transformation, fire meeting earth to create something new. This was alchemy, long before Europe ever used the word. The smelting process was a spiritual act. Chants, offerings, exact timing, because every stage mirrored the transformation of the soul. When you see African metalwork, masks, staffs, spears, you're looking at coded knowledge of vibration, fire, and transmutation. Type Ogun energy in the chat if you feel that creative force in your work or art. African star codes, mapping heaven on earth. Now, family, here's something that still amazes me. How the ancients mapped the stars. The Dogon of Mali knew about Sirius B, an invisible star, centuries before telescopes. In Ethiopia, the Lalibela churches align perfectly with the Milky Way. In Egypt, the pyramids mirror Orion's belt with near-perfect precision. They didn't separate astronomy from spirituality, and the stars were their teachers. The Dogon said that the universe began with a vibration, a seed that spun into form. That's not mythology. That's cosmic physics in poetic form. What if all their temples were star receivers, antennas built to communicate with the cosmos? Type, if you've ever felt like you've seen these constellations before, maybe not with your eyes, but in your spirit. The serpent wisdom, energy, kundalini, and African symbolism. You've seen the serpent carved into temples, painted on masks, woven into stories, from the Nile to Benin to Dahomey. But in African wisdom, the serpent wasn't evil. It represented energy. The coiled snake, like the kundalini of India, symbolizes the sleeping power within the human spine. When awakened through rhythm, breath, or ritual, that energy rises, just like the serpent ascending the staff. In Dahomey, Mawu Lisa, the creator twins, rest upon the cosmic serpent Da, whose coils form the universe itself. It's the same symbol found in Egyptian uraeus crowns, guarding the third eye. So when you see the serpent, remember, it's not temptation, it's transformation. Type if you felt that rising energy when you meditate, pray, or dance. The tree of life, from Kemet to the Congo. Now, let's talk about one of the oldest symbols, the tree of life. In Egypt, it was the Persi tree, where the gods granted eternal life. In Yoruba cosmology, it's the Iroko, the axis between heaven and earth. In the Congo, it's the Nkulu tree, where spirits dwell and knowledge is shared. Every culture saw the same truth. The tree represents the spine of creation, roots in the earth, branches in the cosmos. So when you see ancient carvings of people touching trees, it wasn't nature worship, it was alignment. They knew that trees were living antennas, connecting physical and spiritual frequencies. Science now confirms trees communicate through underground networks. Our ancestors already knew, they just called it spirit. Type "I am rooted" if you feel that grounding energy. The waters of memory, sacred rivers, and spirit flow. Water is life. But for Africa's ancestors, it was also memory. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was consciousness flowing through the land. In Yoruba tradition, Oshun's river isn't just water. It's emotion, intuition, the feminine current that restores balance. That's why every culture had water rituals, libations, cleansing, baptisms, because they knew water could hold vibration. Modern science now agrees. Water can store information and respond to emotion. So when you pray over water or pour libation, you're speaking directly to memory itself. The ancients didn't just drink water, they programmed it. If you pour water for your ancestors or feel peace near rivers, type in the chat. The return of the sun, reawakening the golden mind. Let's close this chapter with the symbol that unites all African wisdom, the sun. The Egyptians called it Ra, the Yoruba called it Orin, the Dogon called it Potolo. It represented consciousness, illumination, and renewal. When you see the golden disk above a deity, it's not just decoration. It's the light of awareness, the same light inside you. Our ancestors believed every sunrise was a resurrection. Proof that the soul never dies, only transforms. That's why African temples were aligned eastward, to greet the rebirth of consciousness every morning. So as the modern world chases power, the true ones return to light. Because remembering who you are is the sunrise of the spirit. Type "I rise" if you're ready to awaken your golden self. The mind temples, how Africans understood consciousness. Long before psychology or neuroscience, our ancestors studied the architecture of the mind. In Kemet, they said the heart, not the brain, was the seat of intelligence, because to them, thought and emotion were one. Meditation, drumming, dance, fasting, all were designed to tune the mind's frequency. They didn't talk about mental health. They talked about harmony of spirit. They believed memory lived not just in the brain, but in the bones and blood, meaning you carry ancestral wisdom in your cells. If you've ever felt an ancient knowing inside you, type in the chat. The breath of the gods, African science of energy and air. Breath, the invisible force, was sacred in every African tradition. The Egyptians called it Ka, the Yoruba called it Emi, the Zulu called it Umoya, all meaning life force, spirit, essence. In Egypt, initiation began with controlling the breath, because to master the breath is to master vibration. Modern science calls it oxygen, but our ancestors called it spirit moving through flesh. Every prayer, every drum rhythm, every song was a way to move breath into form. Take one deep breath right now, feel the ancestors breathe with you. Type if you feel it. The Moon Mothers, lunar science and divine feminine power. In ancient Africa, the moon wasn't just a light in the sky, it was the clock of creation. In Nubia, priestesses used moon cycles to time rituals and plantings. In the Yoruba tradition, the Orishas aligned with lunar phases, especially Oshun and Yemaya. The ancients knew the moon affected tides, water, emotion, and because we are mostly water, it affects us too. So the moon wasn't just observed, it was lived with. Each phase was a lesson, messengers between worlds, birds, symbols, and flight. Across Africa, birds weren't just animals, they were symbols of transformation. Human face. In the Congo, birds represented the link between heaven and earth, between the living and the spirits. The idea of flight symbolized ascension, not just into the sky, but into higher consciousness. The ancients saw wings as symbols of enlightenment, the ability to rise above illusion. That's why you see wings carved into temples, crowns, and thrones. They didn't mean royalty, they meant freedom of the soul. If you've ever had a dream of flying, type in the chat. DNA of the gods. Memory, written in blood. Let's talk about what science is just beginning to prove. That DNA carries memory. Our ancestors already knew this. That's why lineage was sacred. Your blood was your library. The Dogon said, to know yourself, know your ancestors. They meant that literally. Every ritual, song, and story was designed to activate memory, not in books, but in your cells. When you sing, when you drum, when you pray, you awaken